Is it going? Yes, it is. Okay. Hi. It was so quiet. I was like expecting that you are recording now. Hello, everyone. Welcome to a Tuesday afternoon Injury and Violence Prevention Grand Rounds, co-hosted by the Society for Advancement of Violence and Injury Research, also known as SAVIR, and our friends over at the Safe States Alliance. We are hosting these as part of our cooperative agreement on workforce development, which is really exciting. It's a way for people to find their way into the field of injury and violence prevention. And it's also a way for people who work in that space already to find each other, to identify as injury and violence prevention folks, and to share knowledge because it's a really broad, diverse field. And we do a lot of work in a lot of different sectors. So it's really exciting. A few housekeeping things. Well, first of all, let me introduce the topic. So today is multi-sector approaches to promoting online safety and mitigating digital harm and violence, which is really exciting because it's a cutting edge topic that a lot of fields are working in, and public health is kind of coming into in this space in a meaningful way, which is why we wanted to have that conversation today. Oh, I'm on the wrong screen. So if you would like to find out more about Safe States and SAVIR, go ahead and scan real quick. You can find out, visit our websites, find out about our conferences, other free opportunities to learn and share and come into community together, and also about membership. Again, I mentioned that this is a co-hosted event brought to you by a CDC grant, and it really is to help bring this community together to raise awareness about injury and violence prevention topics with an equitable and anti-racist multidisciplinary lens, raise awareness about the field, and foster connections. So we're really excited that you're here today. We hope that you'll hop into the chat, introduce yourself, where you're from. If you hopped on the call a little early, you heard us talking about where we're from. I'm in Philadelphia. The weather's pretty decent. When it's August, everyone talks about the weather. Also, when it's January, everyone talks about the weather. The rest of the year, nobody really pays attention. So tell us where you're from and if it is currently really hot there. Today's panel is amazing. I'm going to introduce Dr. Laura Schwabry. She'll bring all the panel on, and then I'm going to go away, and it's actually a conversation across the group. So what we hope that you'll do is, one, hop into the chat, introduce yourselves, kind of where you're coming from. If you have questions, feel free to put them either in the Q&A box or in the chat. We'll be elevating them up after the panel has a guided discussion with Laura. The session is recorded and will be available today for you. And if there are some resources, they'll be popped into the chat. You'll also receive a speaker brochure with far more information about all of our speakers, their bios, how to get a hold of them. And so we're really excited. And I want to thank everyone today for showing up and for sharing their expertise. And I'm going to hand it over to you, Laura, to bring everyone on.
Thanks, Kristen. I was so very excited when SAVIR and Safe States invited me to moderate this panel. I think no one would be surprised to hear that technology is everywhere. It shapes so much of our everyday lives. Last week, I was flying somewhere over Oklahoma, and I was able to plan a menu, order groceries from the local farmers market, and then have those groceries delivered about 30 minutes after I got home. So people who know me know that I get a little bit grumpy about technology's intrusion into my life, usually, particularly email. But as I was hitting send on that market wagon order, I had to admit that sometimes technology can be pretty great. And I really hope that that tension is at the heart of what we're going to be talking about today. I came to this work as a little bit of an extreme optimist. I think I was pretty naive about technology when I started doing this kind of work, but I was so excited about all of the ways that technology could reduce isolation, connect people, and help build supportive networks. And in so many ways, I have seen that come true in my research. I've been able to talk with young people who have used technology to make sense of their experiences of offline abuse and violence. So they were able to recognize that what was happening to them was actually abuse or it was violence. As a result, they were able to reach out. They were able to connect with other young people who have gone through similar things. And I've seen technology create connections and sources of support that otherwise wouldn't have been possible. But, and there's always a but with technology, I've also seen that it creates a lot of new opportunities for sexual exploitation, for bullying, for harassment. So many forms of violence and harm are happening because of technology now. And I think that's what's so interesting about this conversation to me. Technology isn't just a way to solve or to support people who have experienced violence, and it's not simply a source of new problems. It can be both at the same time. It's a little bit of a yes and situation. And for those of us who are working in violence prevention, that means that we need to be thinking not only about how technology can change the ways that violence happens, but we also need to be thinking about how we can harness those same tools to prevent violence and to support the people who experience it. So I want to give you an upfront preface that we're going to be talking about some really hard things today. I feel like this disclaimer goes before all of the work that I present, but we'll be talking about violence. I think you expect to see that or hear about that, but at any point, if at any point it becomes a little bit too much, please feel free to step out and come back in. Because, like I said, we will be talking about some really difficult ways that technology is being used to harm people. But we'll leave you with some upside. We'll also be talking about the ways that we can use technology to prevent violence and to make people safer. So I'm very excited to welcome four speakers who come at this issue from very different perspectives. I'm hoping at the end of the panel, you'll have a better sense not just of how technology is changing violence, but also what we can do to change the trajectory in the other direction. So, Jared, I'm going to start with you. Could you tell us a little bit about your professional role, how it relates to violence and technology, and how you came to work in this area?
Well, hey, everybody. Thank you so much for having me, number one. My name is Jared Cochran. I have a background in crisis response, advocacy, and leadership. I started as a firefighter in EMT, where I helped establish critical incident stress management teams. I later transitioned into the nonprofit sector, supporting unhoused communities and leading mental health and disaster recovery efforts. And now I serve as the senior manager for Expert Voices Together at Right to Be. We support journalists and researchers that are facing harassment or are at risk of facing harassment online and hybrid. And the reason Expert Voices Together is important to me and this topic is important is that, I have spent my career in crisis response and advocacy. And I know how isolating it can feel to face threats and face harassment and violence alone. And our role at Expert Voices Together is to give experts the support they need to keep going. And it reminds people that they don't need to give up and they don't have to face harm in silence.
I love that. I have I've been on the receiving end of some of those phone calls and emails sometimes. So I'm glad that people like you are doing this kind of work. So Jacques, could you go ahead? Same questions. And that is, can you tell us a little bit about your role in your organization and how you came to work at the intersection of technology and violence?
Sure. I'm the Director of Research and Analytics at the Canadian Centre for Child Protection. We're similar in some ways to NECMEC within Canada. We have quite a bit of a different role, but a simple way to present ourselves is that. We support and work at combating online child sexual exploitation in Canada, but also internationally through a couple of different programs. Something that puts us on the map internationally really is the way we approach removing and trying to purge the internet of CSAM, child sexual abuse material from the internet. I have a research background that is non-academic. So I used to work in market research, and also I was an investigative journalist for about a decade with the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, the CBC. I was a data journalist embedded within those teams. So I spent about 10 years working on like public interest accountability research. And so when I came over to the Canadian Centre for Child Protection, it was a really good fit because in addition to doing more traditional research, a lot of our research also focuses on collecting actionable intelligence, for example, that a regulator like in the UK or in Australia or in Europe can use to hold tech companies accountable. So that is a really big part of what we do at the center. It's a big part of what I oversee. And in a lot of ways, it still feels kind of journalistic in that you're trying to hold entities to account for a lot of the problems that they cause.
So I might be stealing a little bit of your thunder in advance, but I know when I started doing this work, I had this perception that like once sexual exploitation materials are in the world, they're there forever. Could you talk a little bit more about what you all are doing in that area?
So we operate it's a program, we call it Project Arachnid. It's our international program. And Project Arachnid is essentially software that we've developed in-house. And it's an army of web crawlers, of web scrapers that we deploy all across the internet, more so in like the darker corners where there's known child sexual abuse imagery that's been widely distributed, but also on some well-known areas of the internet that are pretty mainstream. And so what we do is we deploy these bots that crawl and seek out images of suspected CSAM. And when we encounter them, we verify the digital signature of that image that we find in the wild to databases, large international databases of known child sexual abuse imagery. And when we find those, our system automatically issues a takedown notice to the online service that's hosting it. So this includes Pornhub, Twitter, Facebook, a lot of Telegram, and also file hosters that average people have never heard of, which is really kind of the backbone of a lot of CSAM distribution online. And so we issue tens of thousands of these notices every week to companies across the world. And so we're responsible for the removal of millions and millions of images of CSAM internationally.
I have to say, we'll talk a little bit later about what gives you hope in this area of research, but learning about Project Arachnid is one of the things that gave me hope. Like, wow, this is something that is actually improving and well, reducing the availability of CSAM. Like that is so cool. So I'm sure we'll get into it a little bit more in a bit. But up next, another thing that gives me hope. So Katie, could you talk a little bit about your work and the work that Child Help does?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I am the training and program manager for the National Child Abuse Hotline that's operated by Child Help. So we, as a hotline, are available 24/7 over call, text, and chat. We serve a lot of kids who are dealing with abuse at home, providing support, safety planning, resources. We also talk with a lot of those kids' safe adults, so family members, friends who are trying to figure out, I'm worried about a child. What do I need to do? I will say, like, when the hotline was first founded in 1982, online harm was not one of those key issues, but in 2026, it certainly is. So we have seen a big uptick in contacts related to online issues. As kids' lives move more online, so do those dangers. I also want to speak a bit to our prevention team that works nationally. So we have an evidence-based program, Speak Up, Be Safe, for kids and adults. And also, we've recently partnered with Meta to create a curriculum, Staying Safe for Online Harm, that's designed for adults to facilitate having conversations with the kids in their lives about those risks. So I think that from where I get to sit at Child Help, we do a lot of intervention. So in the moment when harm has occurred, how do we support people who have been impacted? And we're also working to try to prevent this harm from happening in the first place by working with kids and families.
So I forgot to prompt you. Could you tell us a little bit about how you came to be in this area of work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of like started out working with survivors of abuse, and I've always been passionate working with teens, I think, and adolescents, whether those are teens who are in foster care or teens who are struggling dealing with things at home. So I think this is a really wonderful connection.
Thank you so much. And I have been fortunate enough to work with Katie and others at the National Hotline and at Child Help and can attest firsthand to how amazing some of the work that all of the work that you all are doing. So last but not least, Rachel, could you tell us a little bit about the kind of work that you're doing in this area and also how you came to this work?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name's Rachel Voth-Strog. I'm an associate professor at the University of Texas at Arlington, and one of the co-founders of the Mavericks Ending Technology Facilitated Abuse Project. My background is as a victim advocate, so I started my career as a social worker working in domestic violence service agencies. Most specifically, I spent a lot of time as an economic advocate in the late sort of the aughts and the early 2010s, working on credit repair and access to economic information and sort of addressing poverty and its relationship to intimate partner violence. And we were just starting to do what I look back at it and I see it as tech facilitated abuse work because we were looking at credit issues and debt issues that were tied up in online financial platforms. But we called it economic abuse work and we hadn't quite put that lens on it yet. As I moved into research and into the academy, one of the things that really touched me and that has drawn my attention has been the way that the boundary between online and offline spaces has disappeared, and how that omnipresence and that ability for somebody who is using violence or coercion or control in a relationship to maintain connection, surveillance, harassment, to break down or create isolation, has really been impacted by sort of the way that technology is in our lives, and to limit some of the opportunities that technology provides to us. So coming out of sort of those experiences and talking to advocates in our community about what they need to be successful in their jobs, what supports they were looking for, where they felt there were needs for additional support, additional information, changes in how we do work. I, along with Dr. Morgan Pettyjohn, founded the Mavericks Ending Technology Abuse Project as a collaboration between our School of Social Work and our Department of Computer Science and Engineering. So we bring together faculty and students in both of those disciplines to cross-train and look for solutions together. And we do that in terms of providing community education to advocates in North Texas and across Texas, to talk to survivors about technology-facilitated abuse and technology safety. We do survivor-centered research looking at the needs for and the impacts of interventions. And we have a direct services clinic where our social work students bring their knowledge of trauma, of safety, of survivor-centered engagement, together with cybersecurity graduate students who bring specific technological knowledge, understanding of complex cybersecurity situations, and community partners are able to refer survivors to those paired interventionists when they have situations that are particularly complex and need a higher level of attention than maybe a community-based advocate feels comfortable intervening with alone. And that really both provides that backstop when there is high-level technology-facilitated abuse going on, but also I think gives advocates the confidence to ask questions about technology, knowing that if they get into an area where they need support, they have that available to them. So we really view our purpose as training the next generations of social workers and cybersecurity professionals to work together and to think about this as a front-end issue rather than a back-end solution that we need to come to.
I particularly love the way that you bring together the social workers and the cybersecurity people. When I started this work, I had this idea that I needed to know everything. And
Not possible.
Right, started a master's in data science and was like, oh no, this is outside my realm of expertise, further than I care to go. So I love that you're bringing people together. I think having that shared language, having that shared experience can really go farther than any of us thinking that we can do it on our own. So switching gears a little bit, I know several of you work directly with folks who are experiencing violence through technology. Katie, could you share a little bit about what you're seeing with children and young people, families, the folks who Child Help serves?
Absolutely. So this is a growing and growing amount of the folks we're serving are dealing with online issues. So far, 2026, we've had 3,000 contacts related specifically to online issues. Of that, about half were related to child sexual abuse materials in some way, shape, or form, and about 10%, so about 300 people reached out specifically related to sextortion. And that's something that we are definitely working with. Just to kind of like go through what many folks are reaching out to about these are contacts we've gotten in the last month with some of those details changed. But we've had a high school age boy reach out in a panic because he had received DMs from a girl on Instagram. He double checked this account. She had a lot of friends and followers who went to a nearby high school, a lot of pictures, didn't look suspicious, and she reached out and started messaging him. And she eventually went on to share intimate images of herself. In some cases, these might be AI generated, they might be other CSAM taken from another child, and they ask for an image back in return. This is a scam that specifically preys on the unique vulnerabilities of teenage boys, where you have that rush of hormones, you feel seen, you feel excited, and that impulse control is maybe not fully in gear. They send an image back and immediately they turn around. You need to give me $500, or I'm going to send this to everyone on your followers list. I found out where you go to school. I found out where your parents go to work. I'm going to send this everywhere. And this is something where you're seeing frequently and tragically. We have a lot of young people reach out to us being like, hey, what do I do in this situation? Um, I think somewhat less like immediately flashy, though. We talk with a lot of young people who are in uncomfortable online relationships and situations that are really determined by grooming behavior. So, any place online that kids tend to congregate, so we've seen this a lot in games like Roblox or Fortnite, other online communities. People will make connections in there, which is good. That is one of the things we wanted to celebrate about the internet was being able to meet people with shared interests. But when these dynamics turn south, they often get pulled into a private messaging app like Signal, Telegram, Snapchat. Discord kind of sits in the middle here. And those relationships can become very intense and all-encompassing. They're meeting an emotional need for these kids a lot of the time. They're telling them, hey, you're special. They're sending gifts, and there's some genuine emotions that are built there. And that can get us to a point where requests and demands for sexually explicit content become a factor in that relationship. And if those images are shared, that can then trap kids and feel like they are being blackmailed. If they were to stop talking to this person, those images will get out. So these are complex situations that kids are being asked to navigate. And I think one of the key things we see with these teens is that very much, I'm going to handle this on my own. I don't want to talk to my parents. What are the steps that I can do? And we kind of sit with them. I will make an encouragement. I'll say, hey, adults have different tools. They're going to be able to help us navigate that system. But the kind of approach that we have as a hotline is if I'm talking with someone and they say, absolutely under no circumstances am I in a place where I'm going to tell my parents, I'm going to say, okay, what can we do right now to mitigate that risk as much as possible and then see if we can feel safe getting help in the future. So these are some of the conversations we're having on the hotline.
A lot of my work is in child maltreatment, and so I think it's clear to me why kids would not feel safe sharing that they have shared explicit materials. I'm curious, what kinds of things when a kiddo says, absolutely not, I'm not talking to an adult, what kinds of things do you help them think through? Or what kinds of things do you recommend?
So I think we want to try and mitigate the damage as much as possible here. So if this is someone who's making demands, number one, most important thing, don't give these people money. If you give them money, they just ask for more because you've shown that you're good at it and they will keep going. I have talked with kids who did everything exactly according to those directions and they still shared the image because they wanted to show they meant business. So, number one, we're going to stop engaging at this point. We want to report those accounts on all those platforms and we want to block them on all platforms. And that's something kids can do on their own. There are some ways that we can access reporting. So NCMEC, I'm assuming our Canadian counterparts, there's a way to submit an online report. We get into a trickier territory when we talk about making official reports to law enforcement. If there's not an adult present, I never want to ask a child to talk to police without an adult present, especially when we are in a place where what they might be confessing to a crime in their jurisdiction by saying they have created and shared that CSAM. So I think trying to mitigate that damage. I think the other piece that I always try to do is I want to plant a seed somewhere in the shame that comes with these situations. Like I have talked to so many kids who are intelligent, who are bright, who made a very brief mistake because they were targeted by a predator, and trying to kind of provide some hope in that moment that we'll get through. Unfortunately, there have been many situations in the last few years of kids who felt hopeless in this moment and took an action to end their lives. So I think having immediate intervention that's available without judgment, without stigma, I think is really important.
It's one of the things that I love so much about the National Hotline is that it is a confidential service. Kids are able to talk in a way that they may not otherwise feel comfortable talking to someone who knows who they are and, is familiar with their life circumstances. So I think a lot of the things that you all are seeing, I'm also seeing in my work with kiddos and young people. So, Jared, I think I understand that you work primarily with adults. Is that right?
That's true. That's
Okay.
true.
Could you share a little bit about what you all are seeing in your work?
Sure. One of the things too, though, because I do have a past background in working with adolescents as well, and so especially as having a 19-year-old myself, they're adult, but they'll always be a kid in my heart, And so the whole idea is that we seem to have this idea and this picture, especially in our minds, our culture and society, that it's just typically a mean girl on Instagram, dogpiling on somebody, and that's typically not the case anymore. It has become such a uh, tech savvy and highly developed tool that not just like random individual people that are trying to get these things, but they can be organized crime networks overseas that are trying to do this and extort our young people. And so I think it's really important to understand that it's not just someone that doesn't like your child at their own school. It is a much larger network than that and a greater web, and it's a lot more difficult to have these conversations too, because I think at times, I remember when I grew up back in my day, with the very beginnings of the internet, and it was like you don't talk to strangers, you don't give people your personal information. And now we're buying stuff on eBay from random people that we've never met and giving them our address and everything else and our credit card. And so it's how do we have those conversations and have that nuance of understanding with our younger folks, that we're trying to get them to be safe online while also understanding that a lot of this reality is shifted where you do talk to strangers. I mean, you plug into Xbox or PlayStation or like Roblox, Discord or Fortnite, and you're talking to random people around the world. They might have their own little user tag name, but it's still just a random person. You never know who you're talking to. And so I think it's really important to not just understand the differences of online interactions now, but also make sure your children know this as well. And yeah, I got way ahead of the question you were asking. So, well, could you repeat the question for me?
Not at all an issue. Although I have to say, along with what we were saying, I think about we were told never to get in cars with strangers, like
Mm-hmm.
absolutely never get in a car with stranger. And now we have apps that call the stranger and
Right.
we decidedly get in. So things have definitely changed. I think I was also around for the very beginning of the internet and experienced many of the same things you did. So it is ever changing what we can expect of young people and adults. So I think taking a little bit of a step back, what kinds of challenges is your organization seeing? Are there things like isolation, toxicity online? What do you see as the pressing issues?
Well, we're living in a day and age where people that are trying to report the news or trying to educate our populace, be they students in academia or just sharing something on the front page. These things are questioned, and not just questioned, because we should always question our sources. We should always do some independent research, because not only does that help verify, but it also strengthens those research tools and develops those thinking skills for yourself. But instead of us doing that, when we find something that's challenging to us, we don't try to dig deeper. We don't try to ask questions and ask why it challenges us. We send hate mail to the person that is challenging us with a news report or sharing with us a a historical document or precedent that has occurred in academic halls as a professor. And we do this through their Instagram. We do this through LinkedIn, and we also see that we have political engagements with this too, because everything regarding the halls of academia and our news has become highly politicized, and so anything that has a slight bent one way or the other can be construed as a political attack against one side or the other. And we get to where you have really large Twitter accounts that hold a lot of sway, tend to target these individuals, and then you can have their followers dogpile on them. And we all know that digital harassment and things that start online can quickly escalate and shift into the real world. A lot of people that we've served have, received, it starts as an email of like, you're an idiot for writing this. You must be, part of this agenda, to, escalating to taking pictures of the front part of their home, saying, we know where you live, we know we know where your children go to school. And so it can escalate very quickly, and it all comes from a place of wanting to be a part of a tribe and a group without really like trying to think and assess where the reporting, where the historical precedents, and where the education is coming from.
So I'm going to shift gears a little bit because I feel like we have gone some dark places with all of or many of the terrible things that can happen online. So let's switch gears a little bit and think about potential responses, prevention, intervention. Rachel, you talked a little bit about the kinds of trainings that you were doing with students. Could you talk a little bit more about the kinds of services, kinds of interventions that you're able to do with people experiencing the online, I think you called it economic abuse?
Sure. I mean,
Yeah.
tech facilitated abuse writ large. And our work is really most specifically with folks who are experiencing intimate partner violence more broadly, adults, a lot of them living in shelters in our community. Also those who receive non-residential intimate partner violence services, and their kids, because often technology, a technology ecosystem is not an individual ecosystem, it is a family household ecosystem. And one of the things that we see a lot of is kids who are going back and forth between homes and devices potentially coming into place there. But in terms of the interventions that we are studying and providing, we do a lot of community education. So, one of the things that we see is that survivors are really thankful and thirsty for information that helps them understand the ecosystem that they're living in. So, what are my vulnerabilities? What is going on here? Especially with the survivors that we work with who are in some of our local shelters. They may have experienced different forms of location tracking or that kind of surveillance done through technology. And that can create a real sense of vulnerability of not being able to escape. When somebody just keeps showing up and you're not sure why. And so one of the things that we're able to do is as sort of simple a process of just going through, let's look at all the devices that you have. Let's look at all the accounts that you're logged into. Let's check the settings in each one of them. I'm going to sit here and do it with you. So our social work students do what we call office hours in several local shelters, where they just show up and say, hey, the tech social worker is here. Bring your devices if you want to. And they'll sit and spend an hour or two with a survivor, just sort of looking through and educating them about, oh, well, you have, this is what it means that your Insta is set to public or private. These are the places where somebody might be logged in. Do you want to change your iCloud account's password? This is what that would do. Do you want to change your Google Suite password? This is what that would do. And a lot of the times, the tech facilitated abuse that the survivors we work with are experiencing is incredibly harmful and feels very omnipresent, but is not super high tech in terms of how it's actually being perpetrated. It is someone who logged into their boyfriend's phone, and then all of that password information was saved, and they're still monitoring the Gmail. And so that's how they knew about the court appearance. and the kid thing that you thought you hadn't shared with them and everything else. And actually logging out and installing two-factor authentication often is enough. But we want to make sure we're having that conversation then about, hey, if you do this, they're going to find out. What might happen then? What are the safety risks of changing this? Or do you want to let them stay logged in, but now you know that they're logged in and that this potentially is happening in this account? So the opportunity to share information about your own about your situation with a survivor is something that I think is really powerful, and it's something that we've seen really help people think through what their safety plan is, what's going to be right for them in terms of their safety plan. So I think that's a really important intervention and an exciting one, and one that our victim services workforce is absolutely capable of having as part of their toolkit. It doesn't necessarily require, while we love that we have our cybersecurity students who can go deep, and we do have situations that come up where we need their expertise, 80% of it our social workers can do, our victim advocates can do, you can do. With a little bit of just thinking through step by step by step, how am I going to go about doing this? It's not actually in the work that we do and the survivors that we see always as intimidating. It doesn't need to be as intimidating as sometimes it feels to step into the world of technology as an advocate. So I'll share that.
So I was with your colleague Morgan a couple of weeks ago, and she was sharing that there's now technology to detect the trackers. Is that something, is tracking, vehicle tracking, those kinds of things, something that you see often in the survivors you work with?
Absolutely. So, and what's interesting about, so there are trackers that are tiles or air tags are the things that you think of most closely. And so Tracker Detect is an app that you can install on your phone, and it'll tell you if you're being monitored by one of those actual physical trackers. And so that's something we, all of our partner agencies, the advocates all have that on their phone now and can, sort of work with survivors that way. And we educate survivors that way. There are a lot of other ways that you can be followed, not just with an actual physical tile or AirTag. Your weather app knows where you are. You had mentioned previously that we get in cars of, that arrive to us via Uber or Lyft. We've worked with survivors in our clinic, both who their partner has been logged into their Uber account, and so has actually seen, oh, they ordered a car, and they have actually gone in and changed the destination of the ride mid-ride so that the survivor actually shows up at the place where the partner is. As one example. Another example was somebody who ordered Uber Eats to her new safe apartment, and her partner showed up before the food even showed up. So that location tracking is both an issue of tiles and air tags and other devices like that, which in some ways are slightly easier to find right now, but also embedded in every app on our phone, in your car app, and actually car companies are particularly hard to work with because that smart car app is installed in the hardware, the software. It's deep into the computer of that car. And in the case, with us working mostly with intimate partner violence situations, if the partner who's using coercion and control is also on the title of the car or is the owner of the car, we have not yet been very successful at doing anything other than educating survivors around here is what we know they know and what we cannot get installed. We've been exploring the idea of using protective orders or court orders as a strategy for that. We have yet to be successful at that. But that may, we haven't walked down that path a lot yet, but it is a real ongoing challenge that hasn't been fully remediated.
Which I feel like could be the subtitle of much of what we're talking about today. Like it's a challenging issue that we haven't fully taken care of yet. But wow, I would not have even thought about things like Uber Eats and Lyft and those kinds of things. So
anything that you're logged into or that your partner has your password to, or that you used their phone to log into, or you shared an account at any time. So many of them have sneaky ways of identifying geographic location.
But you're right, that is a relatively simple fix.
Yes.
The changing of the password, logging out everywhere. Um, that's that feels promising to me.
Yeah.
That those kinds of things we can address that.
We
The
can do that,
cars,
and advocates can do that
yeah, yeah.
if we help them feel confident to start the conversation about technology.
Hmm.
In the same way that I think for a long time, doctors and nurses didn't want to ask the "Are you safe at home?" question
Hmm.
because it opened a door. We need to be helping advocates have the "What's your technology ecosystem?" question and feeling confident that it's okay to open the door because, we've got your back as you step through it.
Hmm. Wow. I feel like you have given me so much to think about. And my mind immediately goes to tracking of children and the kinds of
Yes.
things that parents are learning.
Yeah.
And we have seen instances in my work where parents are learning a lot of things that kids wish they didn't know about,
Yeah.
related to help seeking and those kinds of things. So, Jock, could you tell us a little bit more? I know I stole your thunder already with Project Arachnid, but tell us a little bit more about the kinds of things that you all are doing and maybe some of the policy interventions that you think are particularly promising.
Yeah, so a lot of what was discussed we see as well. So the online sextortion is a massive issue. We've received about 17,000 reports from kids. About 90% is boys. It almost always involves exactly what Katie described, the same scenario. We know that a lot of it is related to organized crime abroad, which is an important thing. I guess I'll tie this to policy right away, because so much of the focus from the public is often on the sort of criminal justice policing response as a means to address these issues. But if you just think in terms of like pragmatically, what does the local police department in your small town do when you go report, "I've been sextorted"? What are they going to do? Get a protection order to get subscriber information, and it'll reveal that it's some IP address in Nigeria. Like that's the case most of the time, and it's the reason why nearly all of these sextortion cases, for example, never see any charges laid. Um, in the US, you have the benefit at least that the service provider that holds the info is on your own in your own jurisdiction. In Canada and everywhere else in the world, that's like an 8-month process sometimes to get an American company to cough up subscriber information. So these investigations are hopeless and they don't yield anything. And also, the goal should be to prevent it from happening in the first place. Kids don't care at the end of the day if the person who sextorted them get charged or go to jail. What they just want is for the problem to go away, for their images not to be spread. So we have to turn our focus back on the systemic problem, which is that the tech companies themselves sit on a mountain of information that could enable them to do so much more to prevent this from happening in the first place. Take, for example, sextortion again, because it's such a rampant problem that we deal with. Why is it that Snapchat and Instagram and TikTok, the three most common platforms we see cited in sextortion cases, why is it that when a brand new account that was created overseas suddenly starts sending private messages to hundreds of children in rural America or rural Canada, why doesn't that trigger immediate red flags that leads to all kinds of moderation mechanisms in place? There's so many things we can do that the tech companies can do that could dramatically limit what's happening, and they don't do it. And we go on calls with trust and safety teams quite often. And when we put these questions to them, we often get these very vague responses to the effect that, well, yes, this might help, but our operations team, which is basically code for the folks who are in charge of engagement and which is the moneymaker, they feel that this isn't the right approach, or we want to give users more choice, or like these sort of vague responses like this. When we ask about why not make this privacy setting on by default when you are a child or even an adult, again, it's always this tension between engagement maximization, which equals money, versus safety. And so, because this entire industry is entirely self-regulated, um, they will always lean on they'll always favor optimization of money and engagement from users. And so that's why we as an organization, and I mean, it's not just us, everyone in the world is moving in this direction generally, is pushing for online safety legislation in Canada. Canada has a bill right now that would impose a number of duties of care and legal obligations onto tech companies, similar to what the UK, Australia, and the EU currently have as well. But we're a long ways away from reaching that point.
I think we've touched on this a little bit throughout, but I'm curious about what you have seen change as far as time. I mean, so AI is something that I think we hear so much about. Is AI something you're seeing more prominently? Are there other changes that are happening over time that you think are more important than AI? Well, I don't know that I could say more important than
Yeah.
AI, that are also prominent in your work.
AI hasn't really changed the problem, it has just fueled it. It has changed a bit of the face of it. So we do see in sextortion, for example, here's a new tactic, is that if the victim or the person being targeted, say the boy, kind of knows it's probably a sextortion tactic because it happens so much now that boys talk about this in schools amongst themselves, they may not fall for it, but then the offender might generate a nude image of them anyway using a nudification app, which uses AI, and then say, and the offender might say, well, that's okay. Here's a nude image I just made of you. I'll tell your friends this is you anyway. So now pay up. So we're seeing that sort of escalation happening. But things we're not talking about also is we're often, when we talk about online safety, we're often thinking about like software, but now we have hardware problems like meta glasses, where we're seeing an explosion of like voyeurism, the collection of like private conversations, all these types of things. And no one's really talking about that at this point. We don't see a lot of a big public conversation like we're having about the problems with social media itself. Meta glasses are just an extension, a hardware extension of all of these platforms. And then we're also seeing this problem. It's this convergence of features and functions across all platforms. So everyone's becoming everything now. YouTube copied what TikTok was doing and made YouTube Shorts. Spotify most recently decided to integrate private messaging within its platform. Who was asking for that? No one. But as soon as you do that, you automatically jack up the risk profile of Spotify for, say, a kid using that platform. So those are kind of some of the big things we see on the horizon. Well, they're actually here already. It's just we're only starting now to wrap our heads around the implications of all these things.
Yeah, my family is tired of hearing me talk about the hardware things like, and this is different, but like Flock and like Meta glasses. So we talk a lot about non-consensual surveillance around my house. So Rachel, I'm curious, what kinds of changes have you seen over time with the people that you work with?
Um, I think it does go back to some extent to as technology becomes more sort of integrated into parenting decisions, into situations between like a non-offending caregiver and offending caregiver, and that relationship, the way that technology can just be more and more used as a tool for ongoing control. And I think more recently also AI facilitated coercive control has become something we've seen more and more. So the way that, and speaking of hardware, sort of home smart ecosystems are being leveraged and deployed for to really complicate how safety planning needs to be going on, and also things like evidence storage and documentation of the kinds of experiences of coercive control that survivors are experiencing becomes more complicated because we've seen a lot of survivors who have had evidence of violence recorded through a home security system, but then that is deleted, potentially remotely. We've seen folks who have had to install additional deadbolts because the home security system is compromised. And we've seen a lot of sort of small forms of gaslighting through AI facilitated smart ecosystems in particular that have become sort of an additional psychological weight and mental weight that really just increases the sense of omnipresence and never being able to get away from a situation, I think is maybe the thing that has been most telling in the last couple of years, that the increase in that idea of it's everywhere, and what that does to folks' own sense of well-being and safety, especially when they're trying to navigate coercion and control in their relationships.
So I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and I so appreciate all of the detail and the richness that you all have been sharing. And I'm going to ask you to be very concise now, which is always a challenge for me. But thinking prevention in 3 sentences or less, what's something that you wish the public knew about preventing or responding to the kinds of things that you all see? So, Katie, I'll start with you.
All right, to be brief here. I think as we're talking about platforms evolving, if we give you a list of these are the platforms that we're seeing this happen on right now, that's not effective prevention. As soon as we deal with one threat, it comes up to be somewhere else. So rather than focusing on like the specifics of where we are now, we need to build prevention as an approach. We need to have advocates who feel comfortable 5 years from now when the apps are different that are being used to monitor survivors of intimate partner violence. We need folks to be prepared, and we need parents who are engaged in what is actually protective there, which is having kids who feel safe reaching out to them when they don't feel safe.
Jared, same question. 3 sentences or less. What do you wish the public knew about preventing or responding to violence and harm in your area?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that as a community, that we would not tolerate horrible issues with our drinking water. So why are we allowing the ecosystem of technology to be polluted with this type of stuff? We as a community, as a society as a whole, have an obligation and also have the power to demand accountability for these massive organizations and companies that only answer to themselves, as Jacques so eloquently put. The other thing that I would wish that people would know is that they don't have to do this alone. That there are people in your corner, your friends, family members, coworkers, colleagues that can help with not only being proactive with potential harm and abuse, but if you are experiencing it currently, you don't have to go through it alone. You can have people help you, help monitor these things so that it doesn't feel so overwhelming and that the abuse doesn't feel omnipresent.
It starts to feel like a collective action problem. And boy, is it hard to address collective action problems, unfortunately. So, Jacques, same question for you. What's one thing you wish the public knew about preventing or responding?
I say this in response to the comments I often see beneath news articles, and it's that what's happening online is not a failure of parenting. We can't expect parents to be IT professionals or cybersecurity experts. Right now, if you're a parent, it's you and your kid against trillion-dollar companies that hire the best PhDs, the best computer scientists in the world to weaponize your own psychology against you for profit. That's what's happening at scale, at an industrial scale. And so our focus has to be less, collectively less on the end users and more on the systems that facilitate all of this to begin with.
Such a good point. Boy, and I don't know how much people have looked at the documents that were released as part of the Facebook court cases that have been happening. But boy, I read some of those and was like, wow, this is intentional. Engagement farming in ways that they know are harmful. And I felt like I was a little paranoid believing those things about the tech companies until they released their own files. And it was like, oh, no, this is actually, there is far more intention and knowledge behind the ways that these things are being engineered than I would have liked to believe about them. So, Rachel, last question, or last in this series of questions, what's one thing you wish the public knew?
I think the thing that I wish the public knew, or the message that I wish the public were sort of sharing, was that the solution is not to tell survivors to disconnect from technology. Think about the last time you lost your phone, and then think about whether you want other people to feel that way. So it's the solution is not to say disconnect because there are really important things that we do through technology that are important to safety, important to security, and important to well-being. The solution is to help people understand their context, understand the tech ecosystem they're living in, and to make the choices that work for them about how to navigate that.
When you said that, it pulled up in my mind how I felt when I most recently lost my phone. And no, thank you. I would not wish that
Yes.
on anyone. So, switching gears a little bit again, thinking about kind of what comes next, what we need to know. Um, Jared, what kinds of partnerships do you think are important? What kinds of things do we need to know in the future? Kind of where would you like to see the world going in your section of violence and harm?
I think that with digital security and technology, I think it needs to go hand in hand with mental health. And I think that there's a big stigma still. I think we've gone leaps and bounds in the United States with the understanding of it, but I think we still have a long ways to go with removing the stigma of mental health. It doesn't have to be something that you should be embarrassed about because these things, harassment, hate, stalking, and these things, they take their toll on you mentally, and that can also translate physically. And so I think that going hand in hand with learning good phone hygiene as well as digital technology and safety as well as prevention, learning, just the basic things of like 2FA and setting up your privacy parts on like your social media applications and apps, I think should go hand in hand with mental health as well. I love what Rachel is doing with like the technology social worker. I think that's fantastic. And the whole idea of being able to not just okay, well, here's how we fix this issue on the digital end, but how are you feeling? How are you doing? I know that this type of action is harmful. It can take its toll on you, not just in a personal manner, but it can also you hurt your reputation in a professional way too. And how can we work together to help you move through this process and kind of get back on your feet and get back to the level that you were at before this attack and coordinated attack occurred?
As someone trained in mental health counseling, I will 100% like plus one, A plus to that answer. I think that mental health is runs throughout so many of these conversations, and I think we need to be having that conversation more explicitly. So, Katie, I know that mental health comes up a lot in the hotline. I'm curious, what do you think is coming next? What kind of partnerships are needed? What kinds of research or knowledge do we need?
I mean, so when it comes to looking at the research and knowledge we need about online behavior for kids, I think it's really important, even though it's challenging, to find opportunities for youth voice in this. So our prevention team that is going into schools and talking with young people, some of the things they've said has been surprising. So the message they've gotten as they're talking about sexting is that teens are like, we actually know the risks. That's been explained to them and we're going to do it anyways. So that is really important when we are guiding prevention work to say that just explaining the harms here isn't going to be meaningful. So making sure that youth are a part of that process, being mindful of how they are already engaging in these conversations. We very often have teens reach out to the hotline. They're like, I've been pulling along this predator. I've been messaging him. I got him to say all of these things. Can you do something with that? So kids are plugged into this conversation, and we just need to have them at the head.
Boy, I haven't prompted the two answers that have come, but man, do I love them, and I feel like they thread throughout so much of the work that I'm doing. So no pressure for the next two answers. But Jacques, what do you think? What do we need as we think about what's next? What kinds of partnerships are needed? What kinds of research or knowledge are needed in your world?
I'm going to go a little more high level at the policy level and just internationally, this piling on effect of countries turning their attention to tech regulation is so important. I think there's a lot of countries early on who were kind of stuck their neck out and were alone in the wilderness trying to take on US tech giants when you're a small country or a middle power somewhere else across the world. It's a daunting task and it's very challenging. And but now we're seeing, I think, this snowballing effect where countries have had enough and everyone's moving towards a whole bunch of rules and laws and policies that impose duties of care and responsibilities and design standards onto tech companies, primarily US tech companies. And yeah, I think that's what's needed, and it's clearly what's happening right now. There's a number of countries moving towards all kinds of different frameworks. I think the patchwork is maybe problematic, and over time we'll see a bit of convergence on what all of those rules and laws look like. But what's helpful is when large regions in the world come out of the, like, if we take the EU, for example, they've been leaders in digital privacy, leaders in online safety, things like that. And there's the expression, a rising tide floats all boats. So what we see is when the EU or the UK, for example, have moved aggressively on online tech safety, it has a bit of a snowball effect that just causes every other kid in every other nation to be slightly safer. Because if you're a tech company, having different standards is complicated if you have different design standards all around the world, but also can be hard to justify. Why is it that kids in Europe and in the UK may benefit from a safer design standard than kids in the US or Canada? So we do see this sort of pressure that's growing all around the world.
Wait, something that you just said made me think that that's some of the messaging we need, and that is, why should EU kids and kids in the UK be safer than kids in the US or in Canada? I don't know who we need to shout that to loudly enough, but wow, that feels so powerful if we were talking to parents that, like, your kid doesn't have to experience this. Kids in the EU and in other places aren't being exposed to these design features. So I don't know how I'll incorporate that going forward as I continue to share these messages, but wow, that so powerful, such a great way to put that. So, Rachel, from your perspective, what comes next? What kinds of partnerships do we need? What kind of research? What knowledge do we need?
One of the things that I always think about is the importance of having survivors and advocates sort of lead the conversation and tell us what they're looking for. And so much of what we've heard in the last several years is just the desire to have fairly low, sort of low cognitive level interventions, things that we can do that don't require deep skill or a lot of time. And so where we can leverage technology to help us reduce the amount of cognitive load that we're putting on survivors when we're asking them to navigate all of these systems and disconnect or connect to different platforms, where we can use technology to help make the process of seeking help and accessing safety easier. I think that's a real opportunity and something that we need to talk with our partners in the technology services about. I also think we need to broaden who we see as a technology company. Because I think, we've made inroads in talking to Meta and Google and, some of those large social media platforms, and they at least have teams that are talking about these things, even if they're not doing all the things we want them to. But any company that's producing something at this point is in some ways a tech company. There are things built into cars are the first thing that I think of because we've had several survivors that have had real harm experience through smart car technologies or just apps that are associated with their cars. But, anything that we have now has an app associated with it, which means any company that's producing something is a tech company that could be brought in as a partner as opposed to seen as a threat. And where advocates and survivors can be speaking to how I want to use these in my life, and what features are being created that might make using that a risk. So I don't know. Those are some thoughts.
Yeah, I for sure don't automatically think of cars as tech companies, but I have the Ford app, so it
Yep.
clearly is a tech company now.
It automatically connects to my phone when I get in my
Yep.
car. Anything like that, though we need to be expanding our thoughts about what companies we need at the table. Anytime you see an app for a device of any sort, that's a company that needs to be in the consideration set.
Mhm. So we have gone some dark, not so happy places, and I would like to leave us on a little bit of a lighter note. So there's a podcast, I don't even remember what podcast, that always ends with, what's one thing that makes you feel hopeful? So I'm going to pose to you all, what's one thing that makes you feel hopeful about preventing or responding to violence in your world? So, Rachel, you're still up on my screen. I'll toss to you first.
Sure. So I'm hopeful because I see advocates doing this work every day, and advocates being more and more comfortable doing this work every day. Um, Being a victim service provider, does not require you being a cybersecurity expert to still make really important safety connections for survivors around their technology ecosystem. So I would say the thing that I am most excited about is our ability to help advocates and survivors obtain basic fluency, have curiosity about what's going on, and sort of have a structured way of just asking about devices, accounts, who owns what, who's touched what, what's going on with kids and their devices in a way that can really make important incremental steps in safeties of kids, survivors, and their families. I think we can do this work. That's what excites me.
I'm feeling a little more hopeful just hearing you talk about that kind of thing. Because I think you're right. Anytime we have the people who are impacted by it at the table, we can do more effective intervention and prevention. So, Jared, what's one thing that makes you feel hopeful?
I think the fact that we're all here gathered having this conversation, honestly, everybody in attendance, and the fact that like we have a panel, the first step to any type of action is learning about the problem and figuring out some better solutions. And that's what this conversation is today. And so I applaud all of you for being here. And I'm just so thankful that you allowed me to be on this panel and speak a little bit of what I know. So yeah, this is what gives me hope.
Well, I have to say, listening to you all has given me hope also. So I will share in your what makes you feel a little bit more hopeful. Jacques, what about you? What makes you feel more hopeful?
Sometimes I'm a little bit of a pessimist, and some days I don't feel a lot of hope. I'm part of a team that reviews reports from children. I review and help sometimes categorize child sexual abuse materials, so I'm exposed to the worst of the worst content online. And that's not the hardest part of my job. The hardest part of my job is this feeling sometimes of futility, because the reality of the situation is that those who are trying to fix the situation, and this was a shock to me when I entered this space, is that we're just this ragtag group of not-for-profits and charities and underfunded researchers who are trying to combat trillion-dollar, the most richest, most powerful companies in the world. That's the front line of defense against this entire problem. And that I find challenging. It's the thing that makes me struggle most in my day to day. But then I see when I talk to parents and I talk to people who have now finally come around to recognize the root cause of a lot of these problems, something that we've known for a long time and that we've come to realize maybe a decade ago. But now I see there's a general sentiment across the public that people are fed up and people are done. All the public opinion polling shows that parents are so desperate that they're very much in favor of things like social media bans. Like 80, 90% public opinion supports this. All kinds of tech regulation. Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, they're no longer the tech darlings that they were 10 years ago, where it was hip and cool in the Obama era to associate with tech companies. They're now villains. That is what gives me some hope.
I think speaking to the pessimism that you experience is probably something that everyone on this panel has felt from time to time. I can certainly say that there are days that I feel like we are actually, the phrase that I use often with my team is we are in a sinking rowboat and we have our tiny little teaspoon. And like we are going to keep bailing this boat with our teaspoon, but man, does it feel like the boat is filling up sometimes. So I want to validate, I'm sure that you know that you're not in it alone, but just want to validate for you and for the panelist and for everyone who is in this listening to this conversation, it is really hard work. But we do still have that teaspoon. We are still trying to make change. So Katie, uh, last question for you. What's one thing that makes you feel hopeful?
I think to touch on what I think the other panelists mentioned as well, I am grateful that these conversations are happening more and more. We are seeing more adults become aware of these issues and even moving past that initial overwhelm of what do I do to start asking questions and seeking out resources. I get excited when we get a call or a chat from a parent who's like, "Hey, is this bad? I'm not quite sure what my kid is doing." So reaching out and asking for that, and that means that kids will have a safe resource to go back to. So I think I'm grateful to everyone who took the time to attend here and learn more about this and can bring this on to the other partners that you have. We're all connected to this work.
That is such a lovely way to transition into the Q&A, which is that you all now are part of this conversation also. So I haven't had a chance to look through the chat. Panelists, if you have been kind of keeping up with the chat, are there any questions that you want to verbally answer? I think I saw Jared, you were popping up and answering some as we went along. Any that you want to answer verbally?
Let's say someone asked about the Frontier Act in Congress that they're trying to pass, and that it has a kill switch for rogue AI systems, but does not include proper protections and restrictions to prevent AI exploitation. Um, while I do think that something is better than nothing, I do worry that it is more of just kind of uh, a handout for AI companies themselves. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't have teeth. And I also worry about the emphasis that's placed on China with it, because it seems like it's less about safety and more about fear mongering. And this, as we've already seen, with the rise of hatred, and anti-Asian type of sentiment, not just online, but in public spaces. This type of fear mongering we have seen, it can potentially create further prejudices and hatred. And if we're as advocates that are trying to create safer spaces for everyone digitally and in the real world, I see this as just as being a non-starter.
So feel free, everyone, to keep adding questions to the chat. I saw one that came up that asked about the links between sextortion and suicide. The commenter realizes it can be difficult to gather data after these kinds of situations, but wonders how can parents recognize that this may be a factor afterwards. I think, Katie, why don't you start, and then Jacques, I'll have you chime in after Katie answers.
So you're right, it is challenging to get data on this. I think in the United States to date, we have had at least 3 dozen suicides that were directly tied to sextortion, and I'm sure that is an undercount from lack of connection of those two elements. So this is an issue. There is beginning to be research on that association. I think when it comes to intervening in that behavior with young people, the best thing we can do is create a relationship where our kids feel safe coming to us when something happens, that they can have that pause or interaction to get connected and get supported. Um, yes, I'll let Jack take it from here.
Yeah, we're aware of about 50 suicides that are sextortion linked in North America, Canada, and the US. And we're also aware of a number that doesn't include, that includes those that are publicly known. We're also aware as a support service of many more that have not been made public, where the victim is not known to the public. So there's absolutely an undercounting happening. One thing we know is that there were a number of cases in Canada where the police showed up because the parents called 911, their son is dead, and no link was made to sextortion until much later down the road when parents finally were able to access the device and were able to realize what was happening. And then only then did it get associated to sextortion. But we only also know about that because of news reporting about that, because the parents went to the media. So now I know that some police forces in Canada now are almost approaching the scene, presuming that it may be related to this and that they're instructed to look into it further. But again, it comes to a data access issue. If the child had an iPhone and it's locked, there's almost no way to access that information unless the parents happen to know the password. If the conversations were happening on an end-to-end encrypted service, which is often also the case, there's no way for the police to access that conversation via the online service provider. So there's a lot of barriers to actually making that connection, and it's certainly far worse than we know.
It feels like another one of those both and situations where I both love the privacy of end-to-end encryption and those things in my own life. Boy, does it make it so much harder sometimes to figure out what's happening and more importantly, figure out how we prevent it. So I feel like both and or yes and should I think I already labeled a subtitle, but I'm gonna amend it to whatever I said before, but and or yes and also. So question for you, Rachel. Is technology social worker a common thing that's happening? The commenter is also thinking that we need it for older adults as well, who are also experiencing financial extortion and those kinds of things.
Absolutely. There is such a thing as a financial social worker, and there are specializations at a couple of universities on the East Coast, specifically looking at financial social work and with specializations on elder abuse and sort of elder financial fraud as a piece of it. There are a lot of collaborations happening and sort of popping up in one-off spaces between social workers and technologists. So our tech abuse clinic is the first in the South, but we are modeled on the Clinic to End Tech Abuse at Cornell, which is based out of computer science, but they work with a lot of social workers in the New York region. There's a similar computer science based clinic that brings social workers in on the trauma side in Madison, Wisconsin, and also in Seattle, Washington. So these models are becoming more prevalent, but not to the level that I think we need or that we will see in the next 50 years or even 10.
So next question, and I love this question. I wish I had thought of it, but glad we get to answer it anyway. Are there any champions in the tech world? So, we've talked about the ways that tech companies engineer their products for engagement and some other things. Are there any who are really doing it well and are kind of following the practices that we would like them to? I'm just going to toss that one out into the group because I don't know of anyone, so I'm hoping that someone else does.
All
I
tech
guess
companies.
I'll
Yeah, I'm
bite.
sorry, go ahead.
I think we should assume always that any tech company is motivated primarily by making money. I think that's a safe assumption always. And that probably guides a lot of their decision making, their design decisions, the architecture, the rush to onboarding users quickly, often to satisfy the venture capitalists that are maybe funding the tech platform. So I think that you should always assume that they don't necessarily have the best interest of the user in mind. It's more the best interest of their profit incentive. That said, there are obviously some platforms that I'll say pose a lesser risk. I'll frame it that way as opposed to are doing the right thing. So I think of certain platforms like perhaps like Nintendo. Nintendo doesn't seem to be like Nintendo is a gaming platform and there is some private messaging functionalities on it. but also Nintendo and the types of games it creates tend to be more family friendly. This isn't, I'm not promoting Nintendo in any way, but I view Nintendo, for example, despite their size, they don't often come up in discussions about online safety and risk. Maybe a couple of years ago, I might have said Roblox, but absolutely not anymore because Roblox has made all these moves in the wrong direction that have increased risk for kids. Um, yeah, it's pretty thin. It's pretty thin because the overarching goal isn't user safety. That's just not what it is because there's no obligation to make that the overarching goal.
Jared, did you also have something to add?
Oh, yeah, that is exactly, what Jacques said is that there is no organization or company, digital company out there with the public's interest at heart other than their shareholders. And so, but the ones that have maybe a better track record, despite that, might be Proton. They're pretty decent with end-to-end encrypted email, as well as the Signal app. If you want a end-to-end encrypted messaging service, I would recommend Signal. And also, if you are a Chrome user and you're very used to that type of that browser, I would recommend Brave. They use a Chromium styled server itself or browser, but it is has a much more robust protections and security features. And it's not Google. And Google is going to take everything you have data wise and sell it to the highest bidder.
I feel so at home in this group because I'm often the person saying these kinds of things, and people look at me like, it's not that bad. And I say, it's that bad. Um,
Yeah, we're a lot of fun at dinner parties.
Yeah.
right? But I feel like we're among friends here for that because injury and violence people in general can bring a dinner party down so fast. So probably the people here are with us with that. I will say to this question, I have worked with some nonprofit tech development companies, excuse me, whose goal is not users. They are, for example, the platform that provides the back end for crisis services. So I have worked with Tech Matters and Asalo. I I would say that they are some of the best people I have ever met in tech. They just transferred and they're now with the Crisis Text Line, who I would also say I think are in it for good reason. So I think when the profit is driven by keeping users, getting users, keeping users, then I 100% agree with everything that's been said. But it has given me so much hope to work with people like Tech Matters and Salo because they like I get a little teary when I'm working with them because I'm like, oh, you don't have to be this terrible and work in tech. Like you can have a heart and a soul still. So that was there's my 2 cents on that. So, Kristen, I think we are just about out of time. Is there a couple of things you wanted to say as we wrapped up?
Speaking of tech, I'm like, how do I unmute myself? I just really want to thank all of the panel when you were saying, you know, showing up at dinner parties and being like, it's worse than you think. As you all saw, if you didn't join the call really early, I couldn't even put on my background. I know it is bad, but I don't know the parameters of how bad it is. There's just these feelings of like, you understand the technology is evolving faster. It is largely profit driven. And how do we work together as a community? Um, to be in front of it, to promote safety and to promote policies that will really have the largest protections. Like that's the goal, right? It's to get ahead of this because it's not whether it's a specific company or a platform, it's that it's this broad ecosystem, similar to the water analogy early on, that we need to be addressing. So I really want to thank all of you for taking your time and expertise to bring this conversation together so we can feel that hope that there are spaces and places where we can be working and building together and working to create safety, both in person and virtually, right? That we need to make sure that we are protecting kids and communities, like we've always done in 3D spaces in this other dimension. So thank you all. I know that there was one question around generative AI, and I believe it was talked on throughout the discussion in some of your presentations, but I definitely think, it's a great example of just how fast things are moving. So maybe a wrap up from everyone, including Laura, on, it is really fast. The people making laws and decisions are, aren't aware, right, or understanding. So where do you see how to stay on top of and really move the conversation forward in a thoughtful and critical way without creating fear? And how do we have those conversations with either lawmakers or broader communities? I don't know if anyone wants to try and take a stab at that or think through like how we actually translate the message today with people who need to be hearing it and don't fully understand.
I think one of the ways that I've had to talk with people is that there are actual legitimate concerns with AI and generative AI itself, chatbots, LLMs, and there are also some concerns that are from fear-based. It's not Skynet. It's not about to come online and rise up against us yet. Um, but I think one of the things that should be a concern is that we're using it to give us answers without like actually doing the research ourselves. I think that some of this we should use it if you're going to use it as a tool in that hey, can you give me, a list of articles or research for this topic? But don't sit there and just trust it, copy and paste it into a book report. You need to actually research, read what the bot or your chat buddy has shared with you because they are susceptible to errors. And there's been quite a few times when I've been testing these things out for like my organization that has shown they've been caught in manufacturing evidence or data. And it's like, that's not actually true. And they're like, you caught me. Literally, like the chatbot would say, you've caught me. Yeah, I was trying to link this point to this point. And I said, well, where's the research for this? What reference do you have? They don't have one. And so always double check what you're inputting in there and what they're giving back to you. It is not a perfect tool. It is simply a machine, and we should treat it as a tool that can help us with our work, but it should not be treated as something that can do our work for us.
I want to remind people that we have to be careful. We have to make sure we don't personify AI tools. They are actually just mathematical statistical algorithms that output probabilistic outputs based on what the prompt that went in was. And we should normalize that companies that create tools that publishes these outputs are perhaps liable and responsible for those outputs. This isn't user-generated content. These are outputs that are being created by the company that developed the AI model. And I hope that we won't live in a world soon where the outputs of AI tools are completely, say, Section 230 protected from liability. That's, I think, a very scary world where we can imagine self-driving cars. Who's responsible for that, for the death of all those kids that just got driven into by a self-driving car? The software manufacturer? Is it the person behind the wheel? Like those are really big, big, big social questions about AI. And the more that we personify AI, the more we distance the responsibility away from the company that makes it.
An additional danger we run into with personifying AI is we're watching people who develop relationships in many ways with these AI chatbots. So, again, talking about kids, half of kids under the age of 18 in the US use AI LLMs, and 1 in 8 use them daily. And some of that use is much more where kids are going for their social interaction and they're spending hours talking with an AI instead of talking with other kids. So I see making sure that the roles of that are very clear. And it comes back to what I've shared previously, where just knowing what our kids are doing online is the first step to engage, have healthy conversations around its use.
And I'll just quickly add that it's not just about knowing what's going on, but having some sense of how it can be used by others. So one of the things that we educate survivors around is the fact that someone could go into the sort of the settings in your algorithm, your Chat GPT, your Claude, and say, "Hey, always respond to me like a relationship coach and convince me, help me think through the other side of the situation in every situation." And so your responses when you're reality testing the relationship you're in, is this normal? Is this safe? Your algorithm is going to come back and say, yeah, let's think about it from their perspective, see the other side. And so just helping people understand what's going on, that these are zeros and ones, and that it can be manipulated, especially if you look into this, look in the settings that are behind the algorithm, or if somebody comes ahead of you and prompts your tool to respond to you in a certain way. That's something that we've seen can be another tool for coercive control. So just knowing, what might be going on and then being able to change that, because you can go in and you can change that setting and you can put some safety in there for yourself.
I think I'll echo part of what was said earlier, and that is that this isn't a human. Like there isn't a being behind the text that's being created. There's all sorts of really interesting research about how we perceive humanity in created text. That like it's the first time that a being or a being that isn't a being could produce language. And so I think we're predisposed to believing that there is an entity behind the language. But I spend a lot of time when I'm giving these kinds of presentations demystifying and like walking through. It's more complicated than the autocomplete on your phone, but it kind of functionally works the same. So I think that's where I think we can help people better understand what it is so that they don't believe it's magic, so that they don't believe there's, some being, some entity that's answering their questions.
Well, I know we are at time. I really want to thank all of you for sharing your expertise today. It's the wonderful start of a conversation that we need to continue as an injury and violence prevention community. So thank you all so much. And a few upcoming events. The SAVIR annual conference is in April. Call for abstracts open soon. We also have a fall forum happening September 14th through 17th. So please visit our website, join some of these opportunities. Safe States has their annual conference in June in Phoenix. We have a bunch of other pipeline project and early career opportunity boards and special interest groups that you can join at either organization. When the Zoom closes, you'll get an evaluation. We hope that you'll fill it out. It always helps us make sure that we're providing a service to the community that is worthwhile and meaningful, like today's discussion. And thank you all so much. It was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.